Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live chat on a very important topic. We really look forward to interacting and hearing your questions. Today's topic is deferred action for childhood arrivals. You've heard that often called DACA in the news. That stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Just to demystify what that means, it's an executive order that President Obama put in place to allow for dreamers, which means the definition that we use here, it's young people that grew up in our country. They were brought here when they were 2 years old, 6 years old, grew up here. We have a couple on the call tonight, Marco and Anarelli, and as you'll see, they're as American as you or I. But until deferred action or DACA got put into place, they actually weren't able to work legally in our country. Now, thanks to deferred action, they can. And in fact, over 700,000 aspiring Americans across our country are able to work legally and go to school because of DACA. So that's the program that's been threatened by President Trump. It's really a direct threat against the everyday lives of people like Marco and Anarelli. Without DACA, they would not be able to demonstrate to an employer that they could work legally. And it would make the immigration problem that much worse because those jobs that they work and the things that they do are an important part of making America a success. They were brought here, of course, through no fault of their own. They're coming of age in their 20s, 30s, late teens, and only know our country in many cases. I've had the honor to get to know many inspiring dreamers, like, of course, Marco and Anarelli, and also like Oscar, a dreamer who I invited to attend President Trump's first State of the Union address and wants to serve in our nation's military if only we let him do so. There are so many young dreamers across our state, across our country. I want to point out it's only part of the overall immigration issue. Of course, we don't want to move backward, which is why it's important that we get some form of deferred action into law or into statute, because it will be set to expire. President Trump has said he will cancel it in about 5.5 months from now. That gives Congress the time to work with the president. Hopefully, he will maintain his commitment to sign a bill that provides a more permanent form of status for these young people. Keep in mind, this by no means fixes all the issues within our broken immigration system. In many cases, our dreamers might have family members that aren't able to participate in DACA. We had a heartbreaking story from a constituent, somebody who was simply born a month too early to qualify. No different than anybody else, but because of the rigid parameters of the program, wasn't able to qualify. My office and our outreach person on this issue in our Boulder and Fort Collins office, Jorge Lowry, we've held a number of clinics across the district and educational forums, as well as participating in other forums to help young people have access to DACA and complete their requests. We've also provided support to countless DACA beneficiaries over the years to help with renewal applications or when things have gone awry at the agencies or when family members find themselves in proceedings that we can assist with. I just want to point out that the situation is very dire. 5.5 months and people like Anarelli and Marco and so many others, over 17,000 in Colorado, will simply be without the certainty they need just to go to work the next day and support themselves. I'm thankful for the work of the University of Colorado Law School and many others in assisting beneficiaries that qualify to renew now before the expiration. We were fortunate to work alongside them in Boulder and Fort Collins in some educational forums and clinics that we participated in through my congressional office last week. Tonight, I'm excited to be joined by a distinguished panel of experts and dreamers. First, we have Julie Gonzalez. Julie is the firm manager for the Meyer Law School office, where she helps clients and policymakers navigate the difficult intersections of immigration law and the criminal justice system. She's worked in a number of capacities as an advocate around immigrant justice and education and workers' rights. She is the statewide chair of the Colorado Latino Forum, and has done a lot of great work in the 9 years that she has lived in Denver. She will be our first speaker. Our second speaker will be Marco Dorado. Marco is a DACA beneficiary himself. He came to the U.S. from Mexico when he was 3, would have no memories of living in another country. He excelled in school. He got a scholarship at the University of Colorado. I first met him when he was president of the student body at the University of Colorado at Boulder. He has a great job out of college and is now working, and we appreciate his bravery and integrity for being able to tell his story publicly, which he's willing to do today. We will then have Anareli Marquez. Anareli is also a dreamer. She was born in Chihuahua, Mexico. She entered the USA with a visa. The visa expired, but her family stayed to take care of her sick grandmother. She graduated with a 4.3 GPA from Adams City High School, and she is a triple major at Colorado State University: political science, ethnic studies, and international relations. We might have additional guests join us later, but and we're going to get to your questions in about 10 to 12 minutes. But our first panelist, and again, welcome to all of our viewers. We're holding a panel on deferred action for childhood arrivals. We'll be getting to your questions in about 10 minutes. But first, we will go to Julie Gonzalez with the Meyer Law Office to talk for 2 or 3 minutes about the importance of deferred action. Julie?
Certainly, Congressman, thank you so much for having us. Marco and Anareli, it's great to see you guys. Let's first talk about why DACA matters and the difference that it has made for our state and for our country. Back in 2012, after Dreamers demanded that President Obama take action, we really saw, as the creation of the DACA program was established, we saw lives immediately be impacted. So when we're talking about what is actually deferred action for childhood arrivals, the action that is being deferred is actually deportation, right? Before the announcement and the creation of President Obama's deferred action back in 2012, we were routinely, unfortunately, seeing young people, dreamers, being placed into removal proceedings and being deported from this country. And so, in June of 2012, when President Obama created this program, since that time, we've now seen over 17,000 young people here in the state of Colorado apply for and receive and oftentimes renew their deferred action status. And around 800,000 across the country. We know that this has had tremendous impact, not only in the lives of young people, but also in the economy of our state. I just saw a study that was put out that we will potentially lose as a state of Colorado $826 million annually in our GDP as a result of President Trump's decision to end this program. So not only are DACA recipients, allowed to through the DACA program allowed to receive that deferment of deportation for the past 2 years. I'm sorry, for 2 years. One of the things that we are seeing is that you not only receive this deferment of deportation, you receive work authorization, and with that, you're able to then get a valid Social Security number and work. And then lastly, and most important, and also importantly, you're also able to get a driver's license here in the state of Colorado. And so that this program has transformed the lives of so many young people here in our state. And it's incredibly unfortunate to see Donald Trump play games with the lives of literally hundreds of thousands of people across this country.
And thank you, Julie, for also highlighting the economic aspects of the importance of participation of young people like Marco and Anareli in the workforce. We obviously care a lot about the human element, but even those who don't care about that should care about our economy as a whole. And it's so important that people that have been through our schools, in fact, taxpayers have paid for the primary education of Anareli and Marco. Taxpayers should want to get a return on that. Anareli and Marco want to pay taxes. They want to participate. They want to give back, if only we let them. Marco, do you want to tell your story in about 2 or 3 minutes? That would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Congressman Polis, for the opportunity to share my story with folks across Colorado and folks across the U.S. I've lived in the United States for the last 25 years of my life. That's the last 22 years of my life. I'm 25 now, and the U.S. is the only country that I know and the only country that I call home. 5 years ago, the trajectory of my life changed completely when Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was announced by President Obama. At that point, in the summer of 2012, it was right before my junior year of college. And before DACA, I was always in this constant struggle of, well, I'm going to graduate from college, and what happens after that? As soon as DACA was announced, a flood of opportunity opened up for me and for 800,000 other Americans in waiting that has been transformational. You talked about DACA providing us the opportunity to get a job. DACA did so much more for us than just give us the opportunity to get a job. It really gave me the opportunity to live the life that, one, I was in control of, but two, a life that many people around me were trying to lead, a life of fulfilling their American dream. And so for me, when I think about what's happening with DACA and the fact that our lives really are in limbo, and the fact that in 6 months, in 5.5 months, if we don't find a solution to this problem, we're going to start basically telling people, once again, you are different, and we're going to be casting them to the side and saying, no, we want you to go back into the shadows because we have not found a solution for this issue. I come from a family that is a mixed status family. And so for me, it really is important that those like Congressman Polis and those like our allies who are advocating for us continue to do so. Because once I graduated from college, not only did I become financially stable for myself, but I became a financial support for my family as well. I had the opportunity, I'm very privileged in the fact that I was able to move to Denver, get a job, rent my own apartment, even take out a car loan, much like most of my other classmates, right? And so I think there's definitely going to be an impact for our society, for our economy, if that's replicated 800,000 times, where we're unable to pay our loan, pay our rent, things like that. But the humanitarian and the human impact that it's going to have is one that I'm not sure that I want to see happen, and one that's going to turn out well.
Thank you, Marco, for sharing your story. Anarelli, 3 majors. I can't believe it. That's a lot. Tell us about your story.
So I come from a very diverse background as well. So my grandparents are actually U.S. citizens. And my grandma suffered from breast cancer. And after, when she went into remission, the costs of medical bills were still quite expensive. And my dad took the opportunity to come to the U.S. And we came in with a visa. We worked for a very long time, and it was more to help my grandparents pay for their medical bills because my grandpa definitely could not afford that with retirement checks. My whole family's lived here for many years, and I think when DACA came around, it was a lot of like a breath of fresh air. It was kind of like we had been living underwater for so long, and we had been doing things kind of hidden. And I always remember my parents telling me, like, be good at school, but don't be too good because then you'll stand out and people will start asking questions, or don't do this because if you get in trouble, you can get deported. And so it was always being really careful about who I talked to, how I talked, what I did. And I remember the exact moment that DACA passed. It was finally like there was something that I could grasp onto. I didn't have to hide anymore. It was more of I have endless possibilities. After DACA passed, I really started considering the possibility of college. I think I always knew that I wanted to go to college, but I was always unsure if it was a place for me because I was undocumented. And when DACA passed, it was like, there was no question about it. It was like, I'm going to go to school. I need to go to school because I'm a good student, and everyone else around me is applying to Harvard, Yale. Like, why can't I? And so I got to school. Again, a lot of the misconceptions is that as a DACA recipient, you receive federal aid, and that's definitely not true. I worked really hard to get a full ride to CSU from private scholarships. I go to CSU. I'm a triple major, like you said, and I work really hard, have no criminal record. My family has no criminal record. And really the truth too is there's no pathway to citizenship. I know a lot of people say, why don't they just apply? And my family was actually a victim of an immigration scam because they told my parents that they could apply to be US citizens, and $15,000 later, and we got a denial letter because there is no pathway for people like me or my parents who are law-abiding people who came to the US, who are working, have no criminal record to gain legal status. So to my parents, DACA, and to me, DACA was a lifeline. And with the decision that this administration made, honestly, it makes me feel like no matter how hard we work, no matter how many degrees I have, I always boil down to just an undocumented person. And it kind of strips your humanity away, and it's making a lot of us feel like we have to go back to being underwater. And it's making a lot of us feel like we have to go back into this survival mode. We're not living to live, but more to survive.
Well, thank you, Honorelli, for answering a question already that I hear a lot. You probably hear it too. And I know it's a question that it's sometimes hard to keep our patience in answering, but it's a well-intended question. Kathy asked it. She said, why don't they do something about becoming legal? Look, they had many years to do it. I have no sympathy. Do it right. She said no time in the last 10 to 15 years they could have done it right. And, I think the American people are a good people. I think a lot of people like Kathy just simply didn't understand that there was no way, is no way to do it right. There is never any way to do it right. If you had had the opportunity in any way, shape, or form to become Americans, citizens, would you have taken it, Marco and Honorelli?
Like I said, I think no amount of money can compare to the happiness I think that would bring me to become a citizen. Sorry, I feel like I'm going to get emotional, but I always dream about that day and the day that I will get sworn in as an American citizen. And it honestly breaks my heart that I can't do it because I love this country. I love this place and I grew up here, and it's my home. But people keep telling me no. Like I said, my grandparents are US citizens, and we can't even fix our status through that. There's people who have been in the USCIS system since 1997. The USCIS is processing cases from 1997 right now for people. So there's people who have been waiting for their citizenship for 20 years. So trust me, if there was a way, I would be the first one in the back of that line.
Marco, how do you handle when people ask you that question? Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you become American? Again, I think they mean well. They think there was some way you could have done it. But how do you answer that in a way that we can help educate people who say, why didn't you do it, quote unquote, the right way?
Yeah, I think initially my initial response is to say what we just discussed, that there really is no way to get in a line or to just apply to become a citizen. But then what I would follow that up with is saying, well, I did take the active step of applying for DACA, right? Because when DACA was announced, there was a lot of anxiety around us giving our personal information to the government, and basically telling the government, look, we are here, we are undocumented, do a background check on us, here's all of our personal information. We went through a very, very, very intense screening process just to be able to work and live in this country for 2 years at a time, right? And so the way that I approach this conversation is ensuring that people understand that there is no line, but also ensuring that they understand that we have done everything in our power to at least even mimic the opportunity to become citizens.
And by the way, Elliot wants to say hi because his 3-year-old is named Areli, very similar to you, Honorelli. So a shout out to Areli, a 3-year-old, probably the youngest viewer we have of this session. Let me ask a couple questions. I'll go to Julie first. And we can both discuss these, Julie, but what are some of the possible solutions being discussed in Congress? And I'll get to them in a moment too. But what concessions do you think we who want to solve DACA, or as Democrats, should be willing to make, since Republicans are in the majority, to ensure that DACA can continue?
Mhm. You know, I would say absolutely. We need comprehensive and bipartisan immigration reform. At the end of the day, like that's what's going to solve this issue for not only the dreamers, but for the entire community, right? For also dreamers' parents. And knowing that the Republicans are often not willing to come to the table on that issue, let's talk about the next step, which is going and putting forward a bipartisan DREAM Act. Now, there are several legislative proposals, and Congressman, you would be able to talk about them better than I would. But you know, we know that the DREAM Act of 2017 has bipartisan support, and it's one that would allow DACA beneficiaries, along with potentially other folks, like the individual you mentioned who was born a month too early, right? Or who came to the United States maybe a month too late, to be able to register, you know, go through a background check, jump through the hoops, give all their information to the government, and eventually be put on a path to permanent residency and eventually citizenship, right? And so, you know, Anareli, to your point, like that's the solution in Congress that we need. And so one of the things that has been incredibly frustrating has been the way in which President Trump keeps, you know, flip-flopping back and forth and playing games with people's lives. And so it has been incredibly encouraging to see both Republicans and Democrats come out in support of the DREAM Act of 2017 because we know that it's the right thing to do. It's sound policy. It's going to make tremendous difference in real people's lives. And it's going to be a step that we can take while we continue to push for comprehensive immigration reform at the broader level.
Marco, and I'm going to ask Anareli as well. What can community members do, people that are watching this, your friends, your neighbors, what can they do to be good allies to you in this time of great uncertainty for you and your family?
Yeah, I think outside of making sure that they're contacting their elected officials, their representatives in Congress, I think one thing that's really important is for those who are our allies to really understand this issue. And if they don't understand this issue, ask us or seek those resources to better understand the issue. And I say that because when I was growing up undocumented, I didn't have many people that I could go to have a conversation about what it meant to not be a U.S. citizen, what it meant to not legally be able to work in this country. And at this point in time, there are so many people who are our allies, who want to stand with us, who will stand with us, that at times don't understand this issue. And by virtue of becoming better versed and better understanding this issue, they are then able to also have conversations with individuals that we might not be able to have conversations with, to really try to change the hearts and change the minds of individuals who might not be friendly to this issue.
Anareli, what would you like to see from people watching this, your friends, your neighbors, kind of what message you have about how people can stand with you, either personally, politically, symbolically, you know, in this very difficult time with all the uncertainty we have right now?
So definitely echo contacting your representative. We have a very short amount of time to get something done. And again, DACA wasn't the overall answer. I mean, my sibling, his birthday was September 10th. And it was his 15th birthday. So he missed the DACA deadline by 3 days, literally, by a few days. So it wasn't the solution for everyone. And contacting your congressman will allow you to have a voice and have a more permanent solution. The other thing, too, I would say is allowing the voices of dreamers to lead this discussion and allowing the voices of dreamers to lead what a possible solution would look like for them. But also, I would say remembering that we're people too. I mean, like I said, I'm a triple major and I have a lot of schoolwork to do. And in between my schoolwork, I am doing things like this. I am going to like local schools and giving like talks about DACA, about immigration status, all those things. And it can get overwhelming. It can feel like you're alone and it can feel like you have so much on your plate. So definitely helping with some of that workload, because it can sometimes feel like there's a lot on your shoulders. So.
And Julie, I know you're going to need to depart in just a couple moments. I want to, if you can give a brief description of why DACA and you know what Marco and Anarelli have now, why is that important? What benefits or what abilities does it give the recipients of that they wouldn't have if President Trump were to just remove DACA altogether?
Well, first and foremost, Congressman, we're talking about protection from removal from this country, from deportation. The formal legalistic term is and maybe antiseptic term is removal, but we're really talking about deporting young people to countries that they have not been to since they were babies. And so we saw that before the creation of DACA, and unfortunately, as DACA recipients begin to lose their status starting on March 6th of 2018. So we will start to see people who no longer have relief from deportation. We will see people no longer be able to lawfully work. And President Trump has made it incredibly clear that he is dead set on deporting as many of the 11 million undocumented people in this country as possible. And so he has sought to use rogue ICE agents to do whatever sort of unaccountable tactics to try to detain and deport as many people as possible. And so there's a great sense of anxiety within the legal community and within the immigrant rights community around what that's going to mean for DACA recipients moving forward. And so unfortunately, we will see DACA recipients fall out of status, lose their work authorizations. They will no longer be able to renew their driver's license here in the state of Colorado, at least. You know, that's a state-by-state provision. Not all states offer non-citizens driver's licenses, but Colorado does. And unfortunately, we're going to start to see DACA recipients being placed into removal proceedings unless we start to see solutions being put forward by our political leaders, like you, Congressman Polis, and like so many others who are actually trying to not demagogue this issue, but actually put forward concrete policy.
Thank you so much for your time, Julie. I appreciate it. I'm going to go next to a question from Elliot. The problem is you need a majority of the majority to force a floor vote. Is there any chance of getting Paul Ryan to back off of that fake requirement? Meaning, is there a possibility that a bill that's only supported by 20 or 30% of Republicans is allowed to pass on the floor of the House? I sure hope so. But let me also sort of outline kind of what's being discussed, and I want to get Marco's and Anarelli's feedback on this. Essentially, the negotiations seem to be going down the road where they would couple border security investment with putting DACA in statute, along with a pathway to getting a green card and someday citizenship. So from our perspective, as people who want to pass the DREAM Act by itself, we're being asked to vote for $1.6 or $1.8 billion of border security money. We don't think it's a wall. We don't know if the president might call it a wall. It's certainly not the wall, because that's a $30 or $40 billion wall. It's largely fencing that had already been identified as needed during the Obama administration, a flood levy, things of that nature. Possibly it would constitute what President Trump would call a wall. It obviously won't be any form of actual wall across the entire border. That is kind of what Republicans are demanding in exchange for your lives and for you being able to have the degree of normalcy that people who are born here take for granted. I guess two questions for both of you. How does it make you feel that your kind of lives are being traded for that? But two, what would you do if you were in my position or our position, given that those might be the choices that we have?
So I think for me, I think a lot of times we forget that immigration isn't just a policy issue, it's a human issue, and it affects people. And I think one of my biggest frustrations is I always feel like I'm a beanbag and nobody wants to, I'm the hot potato and nobody wants to take kind of courage to own up to what they're doing to me. And nobody ever wants to take the hit. And it hurts a lot of times because it's my life. Like, I have students right now at CSU, we on our Dreamers United group, who are worried about homelessness. Like, if DACA gets taken away, they're not going to have a job. So we're going to have people on the streets. We're going to have people who no longer have a home. There are people who have medical needs, who are worried about how are they going to pay for their medical supplies if they can no longer work. And it's a real worry. It's a real fear. And it scares me that nobody is looking at that and as a human issue. So if I was in your shoes, honestly, I think those are really big shoes to fill. And I think those are a really big decision to make as congressmen, all congressmen. But I think, again, it's kind of a inhumane thing to do. It's kind of valuing one life over another. And it's kind of unfair.
And Marco, before we get to you, I think somebody asked the question, is it 1.6 or 1.8 billion one time or every year? This would be a one-time appropriation. In fact, immediately after this call with my constituents, and I'd like your input, constituents, on what you think of these proposals, I'm actually going to a no labels problem solver meeting with a number of Republicans to be talking about these very items. But Marco, how does it make you feel? And then two, if that is going to be the only way to get this vote, is that something that we should agree to who want to help?
You know, unfortunately, it doesn't make me feel any different than I've felt for the last 22 years of my life, the last 5 years of my life for sure, in that our lives are a game of political football, right? And it's, again, a very clear manifestation of the fact that individuals in Washington very much see the lives of 800,000 people as something that can be toyed with and something that can be used as leverage to advance an agenda that really advances no one in our country. I think that when you look at information about what is happening at the border and you start looking into the numbers and understanding that net migration is at zero, it makes me question, are we really going to, as a country, focus and put our taxpayer money, my taxpayer money, to something that makes no sense whatsoever, the return to something that will have a return on investment that is very minimal. And so if anything, if I were in your position, really, I would focus on what are the things that we can definitely make sure that we can get through as part of the cleanest DREAM Act possible. Because of the fact that when I think of proposals that have been thrown out, and I see some proposals that say that we want to provide them a pathway to residency, but not a pathway to citizenship. That's also where I have an issue, right? Because I know no other country. I pay my taxes, and I one day want to be able to enjoy the rights and the privileges that come with being an American citizen, because I am an American. And so I would focus on understanding what that return on investment is, but also making sure that we are advocating for the cleanest DREAM Act, and the one that's going to be as impactful and as meaningful for 800,000 Americans in waiting.
We have a question from Kate, who's a teacher. Thank you for being an educator, Kate. Kate teaches in a bilingual elementary school, and she said some of her kids are worried. If you were a teacher, or what advice you have for teachers to help support students who themselves or whose family members might be going through this? Annarelli?
I think I have had the same thing. I actually have had a lot of schools call me and tell me that they want someone to come out and talk to their kids because their kids are terrified. I spoke at Adams City High School a little bit ago, and the wrestling coach, even before Trump ended DACA, kids were terrified, and kids stopped showing up to wrestling practice because their parents were terrified. So I say the best thing for you to do is know your students' rights and inform them of their rights. Have lawyers come in and give them know your rights talks. Have them feel empowered, because I think that the number one thing that no matter what happens can never be taken away from you is knowledge. And empowering those students with that little bit of knowledge and allowing them to feel safe in their own mind is great for them. And then also reminding them that they have a full amount of potential, and reminding them that their status is irrelevant to their intelligence, and it's irrelevant to their capabilities, and not limiting them to community college or limiting them to things like that I got told all the time, like technical school. If your kids want to go to Harvard, help them go to Harvard, because if that's where they want to go, that's where they should go. So I think that's your number one thing as an educator, is always encouraging them.
Thank you. And, Alex, who I know and perhaps Marco also knows, says, Marcos for president. Well, Marcos, we hope you might, in fact, be able to run for House or Senate someday, but maybe even president. You never know. We have a question from Sarah. Is there any way to avoid building the wall at this point? I think so. I don't think the wall will be built, Sarah. But I do think that President Trump wants a wall. So I think it is likely they will have a wall somewhere. But if by the wall you mean a wall across the entire border, that was never really realistic. Of course, even less so that another country that didn't want the wall would pay for it. Very difficult and expensive from an engineering perspective. We should point out that for decades, we have already had fencing and walls in place at parts of the southern border. And perhaps what they're talking about is simply extending those or making necessarily improvements like flood levees. Let's see. John said, I get so tired of Democrats speaking mildly and politely and gently, while the Republicans use all the fiery rhetoric that gets all the publicity. Why don't you call this out for being racist policies that we know it is? Why don't you stand up on the floor of the House and call President Trump the racist that we all know he is? I would just say, as a legislator, we need the president's signature on a bill that allows Anarelli and Marco to have legal status and earn citizenship. The way to get the president's signature, particularly this president, is not to get into a pissy fit or attack him or yell at him. He is the president for however long he remains president, and we need his signature. The only way we wouldn't need his signature is if we had 2/3 of Congress that were willing to, in the face of presidential opposition, provide for status for Dreamers. We do not have that. Wish we did, but we don't. And so while it might feel good, and it would certainly feel good for me to do those kinds of things, I think it's more important to try to work to actually meet the real life needs of Anarelli and Marco and 17,000 Coloradans, rather than just grandstand on this issue and run around with our arms in the air. Julie Langston said, I think most Americans feel strongly about this issue. No one wants you to lose DACA status. Immigration reform should have been placed years ago. Students are caught up in this, and most Republicans do care. I think that means perhaps she's a Republican, not that it matters. But as you talk to people, Marco, and then we'll go to you, Anarelli, I mean, do you find that even people that identify as conservative or Republican, when they learn about these issues, what is their response? So are they open to kind of finding a way where you can be an American, or have people, even after you telling your story, try to shut the door in your face?
So interestingly enough, the point in my life when I've encountered that the most, when I've shared with individuals my status as being undocumented, was when I was a student at the University of Colorado. I think one of the very first times that I was public with my status as being undocumented, my story was shared in the newspaper, and I was surprised at the outpouring of support of individuals that I wasn't expecting it from, right? I expected it from close friends, from friends who I knew were sympathetic to my cause, from friends who were Democrats who I knew would support it. But I also was supported by folks who I never thought in a million years would be sympathetic to this issue. And really, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to the fact that they're able to see the fact that I am, as American, I am as much of a CU buff, I'm as much of a young professional as they are, and really see themselves and see me and other dreamers and DACA individuals, again, as folks who just want to fulfill our potential, and folks who want to maximize our opportunity at pursuing the American dream. And so if anything, I would say that now is a critical point in time that we start having those conversations with individuals that are nothing like us, because at the end of the day, it's those individuals that are going to help us ensure that there's a solution to this issue that 17,000 Coloradans are encountering.
I want to tell our viewers that this is your last chance to ask questions. If you can post a question in the next minute or two, we'll try to get to it. We just have a couple more minutes left. Anarelli, without getting into, of course, the Buffs versus Rams issue, if you could just address what have you experienced with people who are conservative or are Republican as they hear your story? Do you find that they are open to solutions, and how has that process of education gone?
I mean, so definitely agreed with everything Marco said, except for the whole buff thing. But other than that, I think I agree. I think I found a lot of support in people who I think a lot of times I was really scared of. I think through this whole thing, I have become really ingrained, even throughout my upbringing, of being really careful who you reveal your status to. And that has still remained. And I feel like a lot of us students are still very fearful of revealing our status. But the nice thing is support has been pouring in from everywhere. I've had people message us for our Dreamers United group at CSU. We've had churches message us. We have had Christian churches. We have had like Islamic centers message us. We've had hundreds and hundreds of different people reach out to us and say, what can we do to help? Whether it be through food, even something like food security, which is something really small that people don't think about. We've had people offer to feed us at least once a week. We've had people offer to bring us blankets and jackets and things that we will not longer be able to afford once DACA would end, because we wouldn't be able to work. And we've also had people say, this isn't okay, and I'm going to take a stand for it. And they've walked with us and protested with us. And I think that's beautiful. And I think it's been amazing to see how many people support us. So.
I want to say that our viewer, Alex, has switched his allegiance because Anarelli is a Ram. He now wants to vote for her as president. And Marco, you've lost his support, I'm sorry to say. I want to thank Marco and Anarelli for joining us. And I hope that for the viewers who joined us tonight, you're able to learn a little bit more about why deferred action is so important and why we are so emotional about it, and why I think it's so important that we get something done because of the threat of President Trump to end this program in 5.5 months, which would be completely destructive to the lives and ability to support themselves, and the certainty that promising young aspiring Americans like Marco and Anarelli have. I want to thank Julie. I also in particular want to thank Marco and Anarelli. In addition to being well-spoken and making the case, I want to thank you for your courage, not just in appearing on this today, but in all the other times you've been willing to talk about your situation publicly so that our fellow Americans can learn from this experience and know that we need to address in law the very real fact that you're here and that you are already in so many ways American. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for the input and the questions today. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try to get to it online. Thank you for joining us.